Welcome to the Social Media Church Conference. I'm Neil Smith, and we have a special podcast for you today. Something I have been excited to share, something I've been excited to announce, something I've been excited to talk about, honestly, for years, but really over the last couple of months, I've been bubbling up to talk about this. So first, Aaron, welcome to the podcast.
I like it. If people were listening really well, they already know what you're about to say. And if not, you're in for a treat. We are joined today by our guest. And actually, in this episode, he's going to be our partner, Greg Atkinson. And Greg, I remember my first encounter with you was not, it was just encountering you on Twitter, but I listened to a podcast and found out what you did. And learned that you are a secret shopper for churches, which has morphed into a whole bunch of really cool opportunities that you were doing. And Nils had the opportunity to interview you on this podcast a couple months ago. And now we're excited to, with Greg's help, announce something to our audience that we're really excited about. But Greg, thank you so much for just being a part of this community, a voice to the church, most importantly, and just a leader in this space. So welcome to the podcast, Greg.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I love you too, and I love this podcast, and I'm honored to be on it a few times. So even back in the DJ days. So
yes,
I'm excited to be on the podcast again.
Absolutely.
Let's.
Before you jump in, Nils,
Yes.
I'm just really glad that you brought up DJ. This is a really important. Before we announce, and Nils, I'd love for you to take this and go. It's really important to acknowledge what the life of this podcast has been, and it does all start with DJ. DJ's voice is not represented here on this recording, but it's really important to acknowledge who had the vision to start this thing and where it's gone, because I think that is going to lead up to ultimately what we're going to talk about today. So Nils, just maybe like a minute, take it and give credit and honor where honor is due.
Yeah. So I love DJ Chuang is one of my favorite people. It's so circular. So many of these relationships and how they were formed and the connections that have been made. Of DJ started this podcast probably 10 years ago. I remember I was the social media pastor at Community Bible Church, and he calls me or emails me, however we connected, and said, I've got to meet you. I'm doing a social media church podcast, and you're a social media pastor. And he's like, you can't be the first interview because I've already committed to Kenny Jang to be the first interview. But I was the first interview. I just was the second episode, to be clear. So Kenny, I did beat you if you aren't listening. And DJ for a couple of years really led the conversation around online church, social media. This is back when Facebook, it was heresy to be on Facebook, and that you were supporting the devil's work by being on social media. And DJ really saw, what was happening and leaned in and just led the conversation with this podcast. And I remember texting DJ probably 7 years ago, hey, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. And he just said, why don't you just take over mine? And I was like, I can't do that. You've put too much into this. And I remember asking him how much though, I'd want to buy it from you. And he's like, no, just steward it well. And DJ had put time, he'd put money, he had put effort into leading this conversation. He had nothing to gain from it. And I said, we just went back and forth of like, no, I won't just take it, and he was like, no, you will just take it. And I was in California, went over to having dinner. Jake Cranda cooked us steaks at his apartment. And we started talking about what does this transition look like? And Jay's like, can I come in? Can I be a part of this? And Jay and I then took the podcast and honestly just tried to steward the conversation and be a leading voice helping churches progress in the world of social media. We've seen obviously a lot of growth with this podcast. The listenership has grown significantly. The relationships that are formed. It's funny when I go to church conferences, people will often be like, hey, I recognize that voice.
Yes.
And it's just fun. What's come out of this? Aaron, you were a relationship that came out of this podcast. And we've just heard so many stories from churches that have leaned into different conversations and honestly, then bringing a lot of these voices to what we're talking about today.
Yep.
So I want to just keep the story going. The story continues probably 5 years ago, maybe, with that. Greg Atkinson was passing through New York City and reaches out and just says, "Hey, no." The story actually goes back from that. I was in San Antonio, and you were doing a secret shopper, and Jason Caston connected us and said, "If you're in San Antonio, you got to connect with Niels." And we went and broke some bread over some Mexican food and some chips and salsa and enchiladas, and just hit it off. And then when you were in New York, we got together again, and just a natural fit. But
we stumbled across Toby Mac live in Times Square.
Wow.
Yes.
Palau, and we just happened to be out walking and touring, and could hear this voice over a PA system. And I remember stopping you in mid-conversation and saying, "I think that sounds like Toby Mac." And there he was, right out in the middle of Times Square. So yeah, we had a good memory.
That was it.
With me.
Yeah. It was, I mean, it just is, at the end of the day, Jesus was coming to New York in that moment, because Greg and Toby showed up in this. That doesn't happen in New York City, to be clear. Like, you typically are overhearing the F word over and over again, and now we're hearing Toby Mac. And then we ate some cheesecake together. So we've had enchiladas and cheesecake. That the friendship is deep. And then we had another meal that was very memorable to me in Disneyland. You and I got breakfast, probably 4 years ago, it was a while ago. And
all
you
the
said
best spots, San Antonio, Times Square, and then Disneyland. It just keeps getting better.
Yeah,
what's next?
Yeah.
When I go to cool places, Greg is always there.
We had 3 meals in California. We had a breakfast, a dinner with friends, and then a coffee, late night coffee. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just such good memories. I think we actually had some pineapple ice cream together too.
Ooh.
The Dole Whip, which is the best thing at Disneyland. So anyways, off the food, my mind is now lost. But you told me at that breakfast, I remember, I'm hosting an online conference. And where I'd known you is basically being the secret shopper guy, and you wanting to help churches with their first impressions, and being an online guy, it caught my attention. And so and then that led to the announcement we have today. But Greg, if you could talk a little bit about what you've done with the First Impressions Conference, where the idea came from, and what you've experienced and seen through hosting that conference over the last few years.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I always tell people the genesis of the conference was I was consulting with the church in North Carolina, and the executive pastor said, "We just hired somebody for First Impressions. What conference should we send her to?" And I was speechless. I said, "There isn't anything. I don't know of anything that's dedicated to First Impressions." I spoke at conferences since 2000. So for 21 years, I've been speaking all over North America, but I was a breakout, a track, a workshop, or even a keynote, but the conference was not dedicated to First Impressions. And so I was talking with a mutual friend and a peer who had done an online summit, and he said, "Greg, you're the authority. Why don't you do this in your specialty of First Impressions?" So I started that, and now I will say we're not opposed to in-person conferences. We did one live in Atlanta in 2018, the same year we started the conference. We did a spring one online and a live one in the fall. We're looking at maybe going live again in 2022 when COVID is hopefully behind us. But what we have found is being in an online world, in a social media world, and an online church world, and me leading 2 large Facebook groups where there are people from countries all over the world represented, it's a lot easier for us to gather together and to learn together and grow together and do training and do an online inspirational, encouraging conference online, where travel is not a barrier. You don't have to worry about getting to Atlanta, or I was talking to you about maybe coming to New York City in 2022. But travel's not a barrier of, hey, well, I'm like Aaron, I'm in California. How do I get to Atlanta, or how do I get to Dallas, or wherever the conference may be? And so we started online in 2018. So when 2020 came along and we had COVID and nobody was traveling and nobody was going to in-person conferences, we were already kind of an authority in that space. We had 3 conferences under our belt, and we're working on our 4th conference for 2020. And we had the largest conference we've ever had, and reached more people than we'd ever reached because they couldn't travel. And so we were used to that online space and being able to offer something. But we had started back in 2018 to create an experience and to create it's kind of like the power of moments, to create a moment where it was not another online summit. You know, we all get those emails of, hey, I'm going live in 5 minutes, jump on this webinar, and we just blow them off. And I was like, I'm not going to be another free webinar that people ignore. This is going to be a paid conference that you sign up for, you put it on your calendar, you tell your staff, we're watching this together. Everybody mark this off on your calendar. We're going to go in the auditorium and watch this together and take notes. And we have a conference notebook, and we have a host and an MC, and it was going to feel like a real conference. And so we worked hard to kind of perfect our brand and create this experience. So when 2020 came along, we were right there in that space, and we're ready to roll with the online conference. So you and I, started, that was, I think, 2018 when we were there at Disneyland talking about the vision for it. And and then that led to other conversations.
Yeah. So, and you've seen thousands of church leaders come, and you've now had several events, and you've learned a ton, and you and I have processed that together. And one of the things I experienced in 2020 is my sister came to me with an idea for an online women's retreat. And I remember having a conversation with her in April. We said, let's host it in May. And a lot of her speaking, friends had speaking gigs that were canceled in 2020. And so she said, let's create a platform for them to share those messages and bring a retreat to women online. And we figured it out. We did it. We were hoping to have 300 women register. We ended up with over 8,000 women who registered for that event. And we saw both the need that was there, and we also saw the response, the meaningful opportunity that it provided to women everywhere in that retreat. And that's where I think Aaron and I began to have the conversation of, and I've dreamed about a social media church conference for 5-6 years of what will it look like to really just bring together our best interview, people, all these relationships that have formed over the years, and bring the best advice and wisdom and conference talks, and just bring it together into a conference for church leaders around social media, very specifically around social media. Honestly, I wish I had done this sooner. I'm regretting that it's now in 2021 that we're having this conversation, because I think the church could have been much more prepared for 2020 had we have prioritized this. Yeah. And I'm glad that our podcast has been beneficial, but I do think we could have done more. And so I just, reached out. Aaron and I have been talking, like, we need to do this. And I said, I know the guy, like, I don't want to do this alone, because Greg has done it. He's helped thousands of churches already. So let's not try to reinvent the wheel here. Let's go to the person who's done this the best, that's added the most value to churches through online events, and let's do this together. So Greg, we reached out to you. You didn't hesitate. And we jumped in, and we are now together partnering to host the first social media church conference. And so, Greg, I would love to hear from you. Why did you commit to this? Why did you jump on board so quickly? And why do you get excited about this conference?
This has been kind of like a dream for all of us for years, without having it vocalized, without being able to put it into words. It's always been in our hearts. When you were talking about the early days and DJ starting this podcast 10 years ago, I remember traveling the country. I did a speaking tour in 2008, 2009. So we're talking about 13 years ago. I was traveling the country on my Church 2.0 tour, talking about social media and Facebook and Twitter, and that people should get on it and don't fear it and get on it. And then in like 2000, I think it was 7 or 8, Chris Forbes put together a book with a lot of contributors called Facebook for Pastors. And I was so vocal in that space that he asked me to write the foreword for it. So I wrote the foreword for Facebook for Pastors, and it was basically, hey, this is not of the devil. This is not something to fear. This is a good thing, and we can use technology for good. technology is neutral and we can use it for good, and God can be glorified on a global scale through social media, through Facebook, through Twitter. And this was pre-Instagram and pre-Snapchat and pre-obviously Clubhouse and all this been springing up. But we looked at, I looked at, looking at breaking down the wall of the clergy laity. Like, I thought it was so cool when I would see a pastor say, I'm going out to cut the grass, or I'm in my front yard throwing the football with my son, or I'm going to my daughter's dance recital. And I thought, yes, let's just hear real life slices from pastors so that we can relate to them more and know that they're real people. And there's not this huge, they're way up here like the Pope, and I can never approach them in all their holiness. I wanted to say, no, hey, I'm a regular guy and I had a tough day today. Or me and my son went to go see the Texas Rangers play, and we went to a baseball game. I used to always post about Dallas sports when I was living in Texas, but I wanted to see real life slices. So this is something that's been brewing in me for a long time, from back, getting on Facebook in 2006 and Twitter in 2007 and speaking tour in 2008, and then writing the forward for Facebook for Pastors and being on the early years of DJ's initial run at the Social Media Church podcast. So this is something that we all as practitioners know is needed in the Big C Church. And so if there is a medium, a tool, a resource, in this case, social media, that is needed to further advance the gospel for the Big C Church, then there ought to be a conference around it that teaches people how to best utilize it. And so this has been in the making, it seems like, for years, but now there will be a go-to conference for here's how to best utilize social media to advance the gospel, connect with people, reach your community, reach the world, reach the globe, and be more relational, more authentic and genuine. And so we've gathered some amazing speakers, which I know we'll probably talk about in a little bit, that are all practitioners. They're social media leaders and influencers and thought leaders and people who are blazing a trail. And a lot of them were pioneers and doing things before anybody else. And so this is going to help you, because when I think of social media, and I've said this before on another podcast, I sit at home on Sunday afternoon and I scroll through Instagram and I look at my Instagram feed and I see what other churches are posting and what they're up to and what they're doing. And I get inspiration. I get encouraged, and I'm like Neil's, I look at Transformation Church and Mike Todd, and I'll watch Mike Todd's personal Instagram stories and videos, and then I'll watch Transformation Churches. And I remember last year at the First Impressions Conference in November, Brian Tome from Crossroads Church in Cincinnati talked about the personal brand, and that people follow persons or people more than they do actual churches, meaning somebody may keep up with Craig Rochelle more than they do Life Church, and they'll keep up with Mike Todd more than they do Transformation Church, and they'll keep up with Doran Gray, and they'll keep up with Stephen Furtick more than they do Elevation Church. And so developing that personal brand, there's a lot of things that this conference is going to be able to help the typical average normal church leader do to best level up their social media game and be the best at their own platforms, whatever. Some people lean more towards one platform or the other, and some people dabble in a little bit of all of them, but this will help you be better at what you do so that you can reach more people.
Well, I thought I was fired up before, but now I'm like, can we just do this tomorrow? I am so ready for this conference. And I'm, Greg, I think you teed that up so well of, man, this is something we dreamed about for a long time. And this is something that is so needed for church leaders. And I think what we're not putting together is a quick free summit to, hopefully stir some ideas. We're putting together a conference for you to lean into, for you to grow and develop, and really what we believe will be transformative for your church. If you lean into this experience, and we've been working on this leading up to this for probably 4 or 5 months, and this moment of announcing it, and we're still months away from hosting it, because we're putting so much energy and effort into making this the best possible conference for you. So Aaron, I would love for you to share with those listening, when is it? What is it? What is this conference going to be like?
Yeah, I love that. And Greg, I just so appreciate you kind of proving the concept of what an online conference should be, and in many ways could be, because a lot of us were familiar with webinars. And we knew that conferences were something that was exciting to go to, and a huge value add. And webinars is something, if you have time on a Wednesday afternoon, you just tune in and you get your email blown up. And I think we want to provide people value online where they are, but actually something valuable, not something salesy. And so that's what I've loved about this conference. And Nils, I appreciate you sharing, and I'm going to share the dates, but bear with us for a little bit longer. Because I want to share my perspective on the social media church and what my journey with social media church has been, because I think it speaks to so many of you as listeners, and I know it does, because of the emails I get in my inbox from our listeners and from this community that engages with us. You said you almost wish that we would have done this sooner. What I love is that we haven't done it sooner. Because this has been a podcast that has been going, starting from DJ. There's been a couple different co-hosts. This has been such an organic movement, Nils, led by you and stewarded well by you, since DJ teed you up to really take it and run with it. And I know that you would echo all of the same things that Greg just talked about being passionate about, and you have been giving the same advice. And really, there's so many thought leaders who we've had on this podcast who have been leading this conversation around encouraging pastors, encouraging ministries, encouraging people to engage with social media in a new way, and in a way that actually helps advance their ministry. And so this has been such a value add to the community, that it's really, the conference was almost forced out of us, because that is the next step in good stewardship of this podcast, is combining all of these people who have contributed to the thoughts, in creating a space where they can all be, and then delivering that as a package to the people who continue to ask. I talked about the emails in my inbox, who continue to ask, how do we do this? And there's people who continue, and this is how I started. This is what I love. So my first week into ministry, 2013, I was at a small church. I talk about this all the time because it's important to know that we're not just talking to people, to churches who have a social media manager. We are talking to churches of all sizes. We are talking to many different people within the organization of the church, not just the social media pastor, not just the lead pastor, not just the online campus pastor. We all became digital. All of our ministries went digital through the coronavirus. So really, we're talking to everybody that wants to amplify their ministry. And I like you talking about the personal brand, Greg, so important. And this isn't about getting followers. This is about amplifying our own ministries and the calls that God has placed on our individual lives, and doing that really well. And not all of us have the time, especially if you are from, like myself, a church of 300, meeting in a middle school. We didn't even own our own building in a small town in Oregon. We don't know the best practices. We have the ministry on our heart, and we have smartphones. We have the ability to do it, but we don't have the ability for best practices. And so this, I remember Googling. I didn't even Google it. It was the wife of our lead pastor, who was also the worship pastor, part-time worship pastor. And she was like, let's just Google social media church. So 2013, Google social media church. This is the first podcast that came up, and I immediately DM'd Jay and Nils on Twitter. And then I am still now, as the co-host of this podcast, which is crazy to me because this helped shape my ministry for those 5 years, and ultimately what led me to get this job as an online pastor here in Southern California. No joke, a couple weeks ago, got an email from someone saying, I just Googled social media church because I needed help in this area, and found this podcast. And so 7 years later, people are still Googling the same thing and finding the same podcast, and then reaching out and we have a personal relationship with this audience. We're not above helping people and interacting with people. And this community is so tight knit. And so we want to provide a conference, as Greg said, that is a huge value add from all of the things that we've learned over these 10 years, all the conversations we've had. And then also, where is this thing headed? Because it's still not landed somewhere, even 10 years into people thinking about what is online church? How do you engage on social media? What are the best practices? You have things like Clubhouse coming out, and there's all these new things that continue to change the landscape. And so, that's why we're doing this conference. And I'm glad we've waited. I'm glad we haven't made that ask of this audience because we've just been able to form a relationship with them for 10 years. And now we all get to do this thing together. So on July 13th, and it's a 3-day event. So on starting on July 13th, going through the 15th, 2021, we are going to have this social media church, and we're calling it The Conference. SMC The Conference, because SMC has been around for a long time, and now we finally have The Conference that everybody's been waiting for. And I have the website pulled up. You guys need to go check out the website. The website, we've been working on this for a really long time, as Nils has said, really trying to tweak it, make it look excellent. We've been sending it to our speakers. They've been like over the moon with how legit this is. It's definitely not a webinar, but I'm most excited about a guy named Ron Starling. And if you aren't familiar with Ron Starling, Ron, he works with Mike Todd, and he works with Transformation Church, which is cool in and of itself. But I don't think I've met somebody with a better posture towards helping a community of people engage digitally. Not only is he a genius when it comes to the content strategy from a platform like YouTube to Facebook, to Instagram, and then to Reels, and then to TikTok. He is just such a practitioner of what he does. And I just feel like a very underrepresented voice that I didn't know about until a few months ago, because a couple of my mutual acquaintances kept talking about Ron. And I was like, who is this guy? And so met Ron in the DMs of Instagram, and just probably one of the most generous guys. And he's just such a representation of what this community is, giving value out to people without asking for money and without asking for stuff in return, just genuinely wanting to help the church progress. So I'm really excited for Ron, but we're going to have close to 40 speakers at this conference over the course of 3 days. And let me say this before you guys answer who you're most excited to hear from. We're going to cover 3 things over the course of 3 days. We're going to talk about platforms, just the specifics of the platform. So we have people who are specifically going to talk about YouTube, specifically going to talk about Instagram, specifically going to talk about Twitter, all of those things. That's going to be one of our days. We're going to have another days where we're talking about the creative, and this would be the Ron Starlings of the world that are going to actually talk about what it takes to create things and how to be creative and where to find inspiration. And then we are going to talk about, so we have the platform specific, the creative elements, and then we're going to talk about on day 3.
Strategy.
Nils, help me out. Strategy, of course. Oh, Nils, I'm so glad it was you that said strategy, because if there's anybody that has been preaching strategy this whole 10 years, it's been Nils Smith. Nils, I got to ask, are you going to contribute something to the strategy section this year?
That's a good. My hope is to kind of contribute to each of those 3 areas, and yes. I think the 3 of us will probably all be engaged in all 3 in different ways. But if there is a day that I'm most excited about, it is the strategy development, because I think where churches get so focused is the content, and the content is critical. Yes. If you don't have good content, you're not going to do very well on social media. But I think that it doesn't stop at content. And it honestly doesn't start at content either. Content is a part of our holistic strategy if we're going to use social media effectively. So yeah, those days, and even that format, this is a new format that we're trying. We're kind of using the Instagram story functionality of each day will be up for a day and then be gone in 24 hours. And that urgency that we feel to consume it. And Greg, even to your point earlier, is we want people to come on and commit to this day as if you're at a physical place and you're going to get as much out of that day's conference as possible. And so we want church leaders that are going to commit 3 days to dig in and get better at social media. And our guarantee is if you commit these 3 days,
That's
and
right.
you're going to be you're going to be packed with value, and you're going to walk away with at the end of the day everything I think you will need to know about the
Totally.
social media platforms, about developing great content, and about building a strategy for
Because
your
we've
church.
seen it for 10 years, Nils. I mean, we've seen it for
Yes.
10 years when churches engage fully into these things. And subtly, I'm really glad I forgot about strategy because I do think that's often overlooked. Like that is you can have the best content in the world, but if the eyeballs aren't there to see it because you didn't implement the right strategy, your content, it could be the greatest content in the world, but it's useless because it's not actually getting where it needs to go. And so strategy, that is going to be one of the most important days. And it's probably the time that people have least to spend on their own personal strategies for their churches, for their content. And so we've done a ton of research, and we have a ton of voices that have done a ton of research on how to implement the best strategies, which is ever changing. But yeah, I'm just so excited for people to personally and for their churches really dive into this conference, because we've seen it over and over and over again. When you fully engage and implement this creativity, this strategy on these platforms, you succeed and your ministry is amplified, and ultimately people who don't know Jesus come to know Jesus because of those efforts. But I am curious, Greg and Nils, and I don't care who goes first, who are you
Greg, I'll
most
let you go
excited
first.
about at
All
this
right.
conference?
Yeah, I want to talk about two people that stand out in my mind, and they're all amazing speakers. And we have,
Yes.
Sean Cannell and all these great, influencers and professionals. Then we have practitioners and people on church staff. So I'm very excited about that. But I want to back up real quick and talk about something theologically that you said in passing. You've said the word several times, amplified. Now that makes me think of Jesus getting in a boat and pushing out over the water so that his voice could be amplified and more people could hear him through natural amplification and acoustics over a bed of water. Jesus wanted his voice to be heard by the masses, and they didn't have a PA system. So he said, could you push me out in the boat? Because he was a genius. But he said, can you push me out on the boat so my voice could be amplified? Paul said, I've become all things to all people. This is what they would be using if they were walking the earth in 2021. They would be using social media to get their message out. And so amplification is a key thing and a key concept when it comes to communicating the message to your people. And so so we have some amazing friends and peers, and all these guys are friends of ours that a lot of them have spoke at my conference over the years, and they've been on the podcast, and so they're familiar to your audience. Two people that I'm excited about. One, when you talk about strategy, Niels just earlier before we got on air, looked at my YouTube channel. And he said, man, you're getting some great engagement there. How have you been growing it? Well, one day I just decided I need to do something with YouTube. I had actually been, and I can't remember, Niels, if you were there or not, but I actually had gone to Sean Cannell's YouTube conference in Vegas and was there with Kenny Jang and several peers and friends, and Brady was there. And we were hanging out in Vegas listening, but I didn't dive in and I didn't commit. And then fast forward 2 years later, I was thinking, Greg, you've got 125 subscribers on YouTube, but you have so much content. Why don't you post to it regularly? Because I had nothing I was offering my audience. I didn't regularly upload videos. And so I thought, man, I've got all these trainings, conferences, interviews, all this content that I'm not doing anything with. I need to be more active. So I started following Dave Adamson, who speaks a lot about YouTube, and he speaks on not just content, but strategy. And so when I look at speakers that I'm excited to learn from, Neil said, how have you been growing your YouTube? Because now I'm approaching 1,800 subscribers. I'm fully monetized. I hit the amount of hours and the 1,000 subscribers, and I'm coming up on 2,000 subscribers, right at 17,600 or something, or 17,600, something like that. But as it's growing little by little by little, I've been paying attention to things that Dave Adamson posts. and things that he teaches on YouTube. And so what's cool about this conference is you have people that are going to turn in vertical videos. You know, they're gonna just talk like they're talking on an Instagram story. And so this is going to look and feel like social media. The conference is going to be really cool, the way people shoot these things. And then you have people like Brady with a full studio, and he just did a video about making a studio in his home during COVID. And so there's a lot of things we can learn. But the second speaker that I'm also excited about, because I learned so much from him when he spoke last year at our First Impressions conference, and that's Jeremy Poland. Now, Jeremy leads the church social media managers Facebook group, and so he's familiar to a lot of people in the church social media space because he co-founded this church social media Facebook group. But Jeremy is really good with photography. And one of the things that I find myself telling churches as a consultant and secret shopper, I evaluate not only their physical campus, but their online presence, is I want to see really good photography when I look at your church's website, when I look at your church's Instagram, when I look at your church's Facebook feed. I want to see, why not have volunteers walk around and take photography every week? You know, when I visit Elevation Church here in Charlotte, they always have photographers roaming around, taking pictures, taking great quality photos, and then they use those in their social media, and they use them on their website, and they use them in promotions, and they use them in flyers and all kinds of stuff. Why not get better at photography? And so I asked Jeremy to speak at the First Impressions conference, and he did it through a First Impressions lens of using photography to make a first impression. But I'm sure in this conference, he could touch on things about just photography for social media in general. But what's cool about these conferences where we're talking about is there's so much power to a niche. When I found the niche of First Impressions and I did a conference dedicated to First Impressions, people came out of the woodworks because they said, we want to get better at First Impressions. So you take that same concept of the niche and you apply that to social media. Look at the millions and millions of people that say we want to be better with our social media at our church and in our own individual personal brands. This is a great niche, this conference. We're not going to be talking about, I can't think of an example. What comes to mind is Excel documents. We're not going to be talking about just random, this is not a church administrators conference. This is not a typical leadership conference. This is the niche of social media. So how do we do YouTube? How do we do TikTok? What are we doing with Clubhouse? What are we doing with Facebook? What are we doing with Twitter? What are we doing with Instagram? What are we doing with Snapchat? There's so many things in this niche of social media, of content and strategy and developing that brand. And so those are two that I'm excited about. I have personally learned from Dave Adamson, and then and he's helped me grow my YouTube. And then I'm also excited about the passion that Jeremy Poland brings to photography and making our social media posts look excellent. And I think excellence should always be a value. So I'll stop talking. Those are two I'm excited about.
Yes. And I'm getting more and more fired up as I hear that. And I'm looking through the speaker list right now, and I can't tell you two. I mean, I'm looking at it right now, like Nona Jones from Facebook. She's going to always brings gold. She's been such a good friend since I first met her, several years ago, and been so generous. What she's sharing. My friend Alan George, I just did a call with him yesterday, who was the online pastor at Life Church for the last decade. Brady Shear doesn't do very many conferences. I think most people probably know Brady. He's been on the podcast several times. Longtime friend of ours, and he's generously jumping in as well. And I have no doubt that the gold he's going to share, and the gold he always shares, his insight. I mean, he's such a sharp thinker. And so that's going to be great. Haley Vetters, who's a legend in this space, was at Saddleback Bayside, and now is with the Reverb agency. She's going to bring gold. Nachi Lazarus is a friend I've gotten to know over the last couple of years. He's in India, and I feel like he's like the Gary Vaynerchuk of India, and just really smart and brought some real gold to ministries globally. And his session is going to be so great. Jonathan Malm, who is from Sunday Social, what he's going to bring to the content day. He's such a sharp thinker in strategy connected to content development. DJ Truong, the founder of Social Media Church,
yes,
is, we're bringing the voice of a legend.
I love it, Nils, that all the voices of all of the hosts, if anybody has touched this podcast, they are contributing to this conference. And so it's just like the legacy over these 10 years. And something that you said, Greg, I want you to continue because Nils, you're going to go down the list. Greg, you said that you've learned so much from Dave. What I love is that all three of us have actually learned and practiced and implemented what these speakers are going to bring. Because I was looking at the list too, I was like, man, yeah, I've learned so many things and not just learned, but implemented. These people are teaching us. We just happen to be the content delivery machine of these voices that are revolutionizing and shaping our ministries. But yeah, Nils, please continue.
It's so good. It's so good. I'm getting more and more fired up. It's Sean Cannell, who I believe is the best interview we've ever had. And sorry, Greg, but Sean takes the trophy on the best interview we've ever had on Social Media Church. I think it was 4 years ago. This is the last episode that he was on. Go back and listen to that episode. It is the most gold I think we've ever experienced here on the podcast.
It was so good. I remember where I was when I was listening to it.
I love it.
I was in my kitchen in one of my houses in Oregon, listening to this, thinking about, man, I need to start documenting and vlogging. That's what I need to start doing.
I remember the day of sitting at my desk, having the interview with Sean and just thinking, I can't believe we're having, and Sean's a former pastor that's now got YouTube channel with millions of subscribers and incredible impact. Nick Runyon, former host here, now president of PFL. Phil Cook, DJ Soto, the pastor of Virtual Reality Church, where he's going to push us in our thinking towards the future. Dawn Nicole Baldwin, who is such a just incredible voice. Jason Caston, Bo Coffrin is going to give us a look under the hood at Life Church and how they approach social media. I just had a great conversation with him last week. Angie White, who is the now social media pastor or social media director at Saddleback, was at Rock Church before with Miles McPherson. Holly Tate, Sharissa Cardinal, who's going to talk about Clubhouse and is really has a deep insight into Clubhouse. And then it wouldn't be a church conference without Kenny Jang. And so Kenny, first podcast ever on Social Media Church. But I'll tell you though, Kenny is going to bring a message, session about basically a strategic session around the framework. The way he gives us, just can give people a framework to work within. That the value that's going to add to churches. And I had a call yesterday with Jay Cranda. Jay's fired up. Jay is the online pastor at Saddleback Church, also former co-host here on the podcast. And so this lineup is stacked. I can't believe all the people who have agreed and committed to be on this conference. And it's there's going to be 3 days of that are going to be transformative for churches. And I just want every church leader to be a part. Practically, I'm going to get into the pricing. Now you can register today. We've got an early bird pricing of $30. That means it's $10 a day. I can
$30 for all 3 days, not $30 per day. $30 for all 3 days.
Basically, we just want you to have some skin in the game, so you don't miss it. Like you said, it's like a 24-hour story, Instagram story. You gotta tune in and watch it. We want you to have a little bit of skin in the game, but $30 is nothing. So affordable.
And that's where we were talking about. We have valued giving this podcast away for a decade. But we also know, just from personal experience, if we don't have a little skin in the game, we won't pay attention to it. And so and I think if a church isn't willing to give $10 a day for 3 days to get the value they get in return, you're not going to value social media enough. And then it's going to be $49 after the early bird expires. And so jump in, get that early bird. This conference is going to be incredible. And I can't wait for the stories that I'm going to hear after the conference. But there's just so much, and it's more than the content, the interaction you're going to have with other church leaders. There's going to be some surprises we can't yet
Community.
share, and so it's just going to be great. Greg, any final thoughts as we wrap up?
Yeah, I was just going to say there's other speakers that we haven't announced yet that are coming from some great organizations and churches that are on the way. But two speakers that are on the website right now that you can see if you go there, social media church .church/conference is Ben Stapley and Adam McLaughlin. What's cool about these two guys, both friends of ours and have spoken at First Impressions Conference. Ben Stapley is like the only person to have spoken at 4 First Impressions conferences. I don't know how it happened. I'm still confused myself as to how he pulled that off, but he always brings his A game. He always takes it seriously. He always creates original content and puts together an original talk that he puts a lot of time and effort into. He's a pro, and so I respect that. And then Adam, I spoke at the Church Mental Health Summit last year with Laura Howe, and I think Laura may be speaking at this, but I spoke at the Church Mental Health Summit, and I did a talk, and she said that it was seen in 45 countries. 45 countries. Wow. That's how far they reached. And then I find out that the person running her social media was Adam. That Adam's the one that got into 45 countries. And I said, what? I had no idea Adam had that kind of skill set. I mean, I know Adam's a great guy, and I had him speak at my conference, but I didn't know he could get it to 45 countries. So Adam is a practitioner. He worked with Laura Howe on the Church Mental Health Summit. He ran her social media marketing, and they reached thousands of people in 45 countries. So these people know what they're doing. These are the real deal. Ben Stapley is on staff at Christ Church, Christ Fellowship in Miami. He's in the trenches week to week. He's done online hosting and campus pastor work and overseeing it as a weekend experience director. And so these people are in the trenches doing the real stuff, and I'm so excited for each attendee and what they're going to learn in this niche. This is not another leadership conference. This is social media church. This is the social media church, the conference. This is the niche of social media. How do we get better at utilizing these mediums, these platforms that I guarantee you theologically Paul and Peter and Jesus would have used in their day? And so let's learn how to use it to the utmost.
I love it. I can't wait. I can't wait.
Go register.
That's it.
There's nothing left to do. You just need to go to socialmedia.church/conference and register. We're saying it at the same time because Nils and I are literally doing it right now. You just need to go over and do it.
Go do it. Go do it. Thanks so much for listening. We will see you at the conference. Have a great week. Have a great day. Tell somebody about the conference. We'll see you there.